want to begin by asking you something unrelated to our main topic, which is going to be Lebanon and what we do if the war in Gaza extends to the war in Lebanon. But I first want to begin with Hyman Rickover. I've been trying to find an analog for President Biden's age, and it's Rickover is the closest I can. A man with incredible authority and obligations, served, and this is hard to believe, from 1918 on active duty to 1982. So he served with my wife's grandfather, and he served with my wife's brother and with her father in between. I can't believe that. But he was forced out at 82. Was he still competent at 82?
That's a mixed bag of an answer. Historically, I think he probably could have gone 3 more years. All these things, as you well know, are so variable. But his problem was, I think he had become very certain of his own judgments and refused to listen to others. And it was finally the Secretary of the Navy, John Lehman, who conducted this kind of elaborate ruse to get him out of office. He took him to the White House and had President Reagan try and tell Admiral Rickover that his time had come to the end. And Rickover protested vehemently, and it turned into quite a scene. You can read about it in Lehman's memoirs. In any event, I think with any person, age is, dependent on their own physiology and their own personality and the experience they bring to the table.
And he is sort of I've grown more and more in my admiration for him. If Hyman Rickover hadn't been there, I don't know where the U.S. Navy would be today, because he forced the nuclear Navy on the Navy. Sort of like forcing the change from coal to oil. It's really quite amazing how much we owe the man, but he did run out of time eventually.
Yeah, and I think that it is correct to say he was an enormous innovator. He was also someone that people either loved to work for or they just hated working for him. He was not universally admired as a leader. I write about him in some depth in one of my books, Sailing True North. He's a kind of an enigmatic figure. He really is sui generis, one of a kind.
Now let's turn to the conversation I had for an hour with Haviv Rettig-Gur in the first hour today. Probably the most respected independent journalist in Israel at this point. Michael Oren is up there, but he's also a political actor, and so people tend to see him through a filter. But Haviv just calls it war in Lebanon inevitable, says Haviv. What do you think the United States will and should do when that war breaks out, beyond what is already going on? 50 missiles this morning at Israel. They bombed deep in the Bekaa Valley. Israel's uninhabitable for 10 kilometers, and for 5 it's absolutely destroyed. What do you think we're going to do? What do you think we should do?
Yeah, let me just add 100,000 Israelis pushed out of their homes, which in a U.S. equivalency would be 3.5 million people forced to evacuate on some portion, say, of the Mexican border. So there's a real immediate sensation of violation that is going on every single day there. I think we should send 2 carrier strike groups over there, park both of them off the coast of Lebanon, and help Israel pound the hell out of Hezbollah. If Hezbollah unleashes a huge, significant, say, 20,000, 30,000 rocket attack. Hezbollah won't do that, Hugh, unless they get a green light from Iran, which means if we're going to take the course of action I just recommended, we'd also have to be prepared for a wider war that would include Iran. Boy, let's hope we don't go there. But I think that does become a point at which the U.S. would have to support Israel strongly and militarily, and the best way to do it will end up being from the sea.
No, Admiral, you know carriers better than anyone listening, or at least the equal of anyone listening. We only have 4 operational at any time. One of those is in Japan. A second one deploys from San Diego out to near the South China Sea. Are you suggesting we divert that carrier to the Med or the Red Sea in order to assist in deterring that war or winning it?
2 different things. If we're still at the point of deterring, In other words, it's before we've engaged in combat, then yes, I think we move the chess pieces of the four carriers around, and that's the beauty of carriers. They can move close to 1,000 miles a day. They're nuclear powered. They don't require refueling for propulsion, just for the jet fuel that their planes use. At the end of the day, once we engage in actual hostilities, then I think you've got a different scenario. And at that scenario, I think you pull the one or two of the carriers that are in the training cycle, but believe me, are still ready to go into combat. So of the total 10, 11, say one is sunk deep in the yards and literally can't get out, you could push more of those to sea if you had to, if you were in active combat, Hugh.
All right, now let's turn to China, Admiral. I've been reading Jack Carr's new thriller, Red Sky Morning. Like yours, 2034, and your new book, 2054, it's all about China and what does China do. But Jack Carr, his premise is they're going during the transition. They're going to war. They've already made the decision. They're just waiting for the opportune time. Would we know that if that were going to happen?
I think, by the way, Jack Carr is a friend, a former SEAL, for those who don't know him, and writes a heck of a great thriller, starting with some early novels, but he is broadening his view of things, and I'm quite excited to see where he goes next. In terms of would we know about it, I think the idea that China would be able to launch a complete surprise attack is in today's era is highly, highly unlikely to be the case. And the reason is satellites, internet, our own capabilities and espionage are just much, much better than they were, say, the analogous situation, of course, would have been Pearl Harbor. You couldn't do Pearl Harbor today, the surprise effect. In fact, we couldn't have done Overlord, D-Day. We just went through those celebrations. That would have been impossible to really achieve the surprise that Eisenhower did in an era with satellites, constant listening, internet surveillance, and all the other things. So no, I don't think it's likely that a sudden hammer blow will fall from China.
All right, last question about Jack Carr. And you're right, I've never read him before until I read this. And so I'm very impressed with a lot of what he knows and transfers. But he suggests that quantum computing has already arrived, that AI is ready to deploy to control responses in war, and that we've got a secret Columbia class already afloat somewhere. I wish you were right. You write in 2054, it's all about the quantum computing and AI. Where are we on the development lines of those three weapons systems, AI, quantum computing, and the Columbia class?
Well, the Columbia class, we can say with some certainty exactly where we are. The design is largely complete. We're lining up the funding. For those listeners who don't follow this, the Columbia class is the follow-on to our ballistic missile submarine force. It's absolutely vital for our national deterrence in strategic weapons. That one is tracking. It's a little bit delayed, like a lot of Navy programs these days, but we know where it is. It's tracking. Let's take AI next. AI is closer than quantum computing. I'd say the use of AI in war has begun. We're at the early stages, kind of on the beach at Kitty Hawk in that regard. But certainly what's going on in Ukraine, if you look at the rising number of swarm attacks that both Russia and Ukraine are mounting, and we are studying very closely, call that one close, but not fully arrived in terms of its ultimate potential. And then third and finally, quantum computing. And I love Jack, and believe me, I pulled technology forward into my novel, 2034, about
Oh, yes, you did, yep.
China. Yeah, I think he's pulled it forward for dramatic effect, but I don't think quantum computing as a functional element is any closer than 5 years away. So Columbia here today, AI 2 to 3 years, quantum computing 5 to 7 years is how I would score it.